Tonight, as Devin said, we're going to talk about agreements for sale, but from a slightly different perspective. So just a bit of background. I'm a real estate lawyer. I've been doing 45 years. I really focus on investment real estate and creative investment real estate particularly. I'm now at Field Law. I was with RMLO for 30 years and now I'm at Field Law. I've been there 7 months, and it's wonderful having a big, talented crew of lawyers supporting me, like Danielle Bourgeois, who is a foreclosure partner and who started out the Mogul Meet tonight. Field Law is full of folks just like Danielle who are great at what they do, and they're very welcoming. It's not a big downtown law feel, which would not work well for me. So I'm really happy to be at Field. And with that bit of an intro, let's get on to what we're going to do tonight. So when we talk agreements for sale, and I'm going to explain what an agreement for sale is, often the focus in Alberta and Saskatchewan, particularly Alberta, is on distressed properties, as opposed to properties where sellers aren't under pressure. So we've lots of times talked about distressed properties and how that works. But let's just have a brief rundown on the thing called an agreement for sale. So an agreement for sale is a description of really seller financing. When you purchase property by way of, quotes, agreement for sale, close quotes, you are working with a seller who is prepared to be your bank. So it's different than a purchase with a mortgage. When you buy by way of agreement for sale, it's different than if you buy a property and get a mortgage for a number of reasons. So the first reason is that the title actually stays in the seller's name. So whether he's got a mortgage or no mortgage, or a little mortgage or a big mortgage, if you buy by agreement for sale, you have 100% beneficial interest in the property, but title stays in the seller's name. So that's a big difference from a purchase with a mortgage. Normally, all of us who own properties own the legal title and the beneficial title, but when you buy by way of agreement for sale, you do have an actual real interest in the property. It's called the beneficial interest. If the seller has a mortgage, you might be making a payment to the seller on what you owe him because he's your bank, but the seller continues to make his own mortgage payments if he has a mortgage, doesn't necessarily have one. And this is the key to agreements for sale: the seller is your bank. And anybody who's investing in real estate understands that with tightening financing rules, you can only get so many mortgages. Different lenders have different policies, but there's a real limitation on how many mortgages you can qualify for now. And if you've now reached the stage where you can't qualify for any more mortgages, and you want to buy more property, you got to find a situation where the seller is prepared to be your bank. But really, in the end, an AFS is seller financing. So that's the keynote. An AFS is seller financing. All right, moving on. So we talked about the classic look-see is where investors are looking for a distressed seller, where a seller's under a lot of pressure and where you as a buyer wouldn't have to put up very much money. And we're just briefly going to talk about distressed situations before we get on to the real topic for tonight, which is if the seller isn't distressed, but they're motivated, what does that mean? All right, so on the distress side of things, as James mentioned, there are a lot of distressed sellers in Alberta. We've had economic issues for quite a while, which leads to distressed sellers. With the mortgage deferral program ending, there's likely to be more distressed sellers. So, there's going to be more coming in the future. So there's going to be opportunities on the distress side of things. And just briefly, when we say distressed, what does that mean? And why is it a situation where an AFS applies? So distressed sellers are usually in the category of having little or no equity. They might have put up 5%. They did an insured 5% down mortgage. If you do a mortgage and buy a property for say $300,000 and you put up 5%, that's $15,000. Well, property values could easily drop. I mean, you might have paid 300 and the market could easily say your property is only worth 285. And that is exactly what your mortgage is. So they have little or no equity. And if you have little or no equity and you go along and see at least a traditional realtor and you say to them, you know, I want to sell my place. And they go, okay, so let's figure out what it's worth. It's worth 285. And how much is your mortgage? Oh, 284. Okay, so just so you understand, I'm a realtor. If I sell your property, I need to be paid commission, which is fair. Usually that commission would come from the sale. But if we sell your house for top dollar, we're only going to get $285,000 and it's worth 284 on your mortgage. So how are you going to pay my commission? Which is probably around $12,000 or $13,000 on a property like that. And what kind of a mortgage do you have? Oh, I see. You have a payout penalty. Well, let's figure out what that is. Okay, your penalties are $6,000. Could be different, could be higher, could be smaller. So on that particular example, between the real estate commission of 12 or 13 and penalties of 5 or 6, I mean, we're up to $17,000 or $18,000 that the seller has to pay to sell his house, and there's no equity in the house. So after that seller talks to a realtor, they are now freaking out. They're totally freaking out. Also, the seller understands that if they need to sell their property, perhaps they've lost their job. If they can't make a mortgage payment, that ruins credit very quickly. So credit will be ruined if they can't do something with their property. And that turns into this giant millstone, this giant rock, this big chunk of metal around their neck that's dragging them underwater, and they just feel terrible and they are totally stressed out. So when you're in a flat to negative market, there are lots of distressed sellers, and we do have those in Alberta, but that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. How did I manage to spend all that time talking about what we're not talking about? However, I digress. Let's move on. So tonight we want to talk about why sellers who aren't distressed would want to use an agreement for sale. Why would they? Let's face it. Mostly when sellers sell, they just want their money. They don't want to be listening to you. They don't want to be your bank. But there are quite a number of sellers who are prepared to listen to you to talk about an agreement for sale because of their situation. Their particular circumstances will lead them to consider doing an agreement for sale where they are your bank. All right. So in this category, these sellers always have some equity. There might not be a whole bunch, but they've got at least some equity. And many of them have a whole ton of equity. Some of them have clear title houses. So whatever their house is worth, they have equity equal to the amount of the value of their home. So those are a couple of categories. Now, these kinds of sellers will consider doing an AFS deal because they want their price. What is it? When I say they want their price, what does that mean? You know, what it really means is that if the seller understands that their house was worth a certain amount of money at a point in time, they hold on to the idea that it's always worth that amount. They pay no attention to market fluctuation. They pay no attention to the cycle goes up and down. James was talking earlier about the absolutely predictable Edmonton market where prices fall in the winter and there are great deals available and prices go up in the spring. And guess what? People don't want to buy in the winter when it's a great time to buy, and they'll pay anything in the spring when there's lots of competition, which is exactly the wrong way to look at it if you're an investor. And that's why you should be talking to the Mogul guys, because they totally understand the cycle and why you should be out buying real estate now and not when everybody wants it in the spring. Moving back. So sellers want their price. That's kind of weird, but we had an example where somebody bought for $300,000. If that's what they paid, they just can't stand the notion of not getting at least $300,000. Their talented mogul realtor might say, I know you want 300,000, but your kind of property in the shape it's in is only selling for 280 or 270. That's what the market says your place is worth. I don't care. I want 300. And if I can't get 300, I'm not selling. So that's what it means when I say they want their price. Some sellers want to earn interest on their money, especially sellers who have lots of equity. They know that if they sell their house for 300,000 and get 300,000 in cash, and they go to the bank, they might be able to get 1% on that amount of money. They might be able to get 1%. But when 10-year bonds, when Canada 10-year bonds, which are the safest investment you can make in this country, when those are paying about 1%, you're not going to go to the bank and really even get 1%. So I would say you're going to get less than 1%. But if you're looking to sell to somebody who can't get a mortgage somewhere else, and they really want to buy a property, and they can turn your property into a positive cash flow, solid investment property, they will pay you more than 1%. They'll pay you 4% or 5% or whatever the property will allow when you do the numbers, and where paying 4 or 5% still gives them a positive cash flow property. That's just the cost of doing business. They totally understand the math. And so a seller who wants to earn some interest income is very interested in hearing that you as a buyer, an AFS buyer, would be prepared to pay 3 or 4 or 5% or whatever the number is that will work in the circumstances. Some sellers can't abide paying realtors. So we love realtors. We understand they work hard for their money, and we don't mind paying commission, and we think that's absolutely reasonable. It's what the model says happens. But just like those sellers who want their price because at one point in time it was worth a bigger amount than it's worth now, they unreasonably don't want to pay commission, and they certainly don't want to pay payout penalties. So an AFS can help them avoid both of those things. Tax deferral. If a seller bought a property for $100,000 and held on to it for 5 years and caught the cycle, and now they can sell it for 300. They bought for 1, they're selling for 3. That's a $200,000 capital gain on which they would have to pay tax of about $50,000 if they sold it for cash and just took it all in one lump sum. But if you do an agreement for sale, you could spread that $50,000 out over 5 years, and they would only have to pay $10,000 in each of 5 years. So some sellers are interested in tax deferral. They start to get the picture here that there's way more opportunities for agreements for sale than there is just in looking for distressed sellers. And I'm going to say this again as we move along through the evening, and that is that as investors, you will do your best deals if you listen to what sellers are saying, dig a little deeper, and find out the way to help them. If you focus not on how much money you can make, but on how you can help people and get them what they need while getting what you need, this has to be win-win, you will do a lot more deals, and you'll find sellers a lot more interested in talking to you if you're projecting help and not profit. If they don't see dollar signs in your eyes, and they see someone who's sympathetic to their situation and who can, who is actually looking to help them and actually looking to do a win-win deal, I'm telling you folks, that's hugely influential in having folks listen to your out-of-the-box pitch to do an agreement for sale. All right. So did you think that was the only number of reasons where we might have motivated sellers? Does Barry have another slide? Yes, he does. There we go. All right. So what else does considering an agreement for sale do for a seller? So it widens the market. If you are only looking to sell to people who are going to get a new mortgage and pay you out, that limits your market. If you can sell to people who want to do an AFS, not only does it widen your market, it also can help you get rid of some of those problems that we previously talked about in the last slide. Also, if you're a person who's concerned about a market that's coming and going, you can get a better price. You can get your price and you can lock in your capital appreciation. You're going, oh my God, I know I want to get my price, and I know my place was 300, but the prices are going down. I better do something. I mean, you can sell by way of agreement for sale and lock in that price that you want to get. And market fluctuations are not nearly, not going to affect you nearly as much as the seller. They still could, but not nearly as much. And of course, if you've been an investor yourself, you can offload all those normal ownership costs. And even if you haven't been an investor, you own a house, you have to worry about maintenance, you got to worry about paying taxes, insurance, you got to worry about tenants if you were renting. All of those get offloaded to your buyer. And if you're a tired landlord, that's something that's very attractive. And of course, you eliminate property management fees because your AFS buyer is now taking over all of the issues that you used to handle as an owner. Whew, boy, that's a lot of reasons that you can talk to motivated sellers, but that's probably all. No, wait, there's more. Barry has another slide. So here's these are some interesting issues. Every property isn't as financeable as the next property. So some reasons that make property more difficult to finance is the type of property. So if you have an acreage property, that can be tougher to finance. There can be different rules for financing. Lenders can change their attitude about acreage properties, percentages that you can borrow change. Servicing issues can be difficult. As we all know, lenders have been tightening up their rules, and some of them want property upgraded to an unreasonable standard, or they won't give a mortgage on it. So particularly in electrical situations, I mean, I think every lender now wants a 100 amp panel. If you're trying to sell a house with a 60 amp panel and aluminum wiring, that might really be a clog on your ability to sell. And then, of course, we have changing lender policies. This is, I don't think this is something that's really well known, but as markets shift and shuffle, if a market isn't doing very well, lenders will look at where they're having bad loans experience, and they will change their policies. So, for instance, in one of Edmonton's downturns, one big lender said, okay, on a Monday morning, they just announced they weren't financing condos anymore. So guess what? If you owned a condo in Edmonton and you wanted to, and a buyer wanted to use that particular lender, they couldn't get a mortgage. That's where an agreement for sale would be very valuable for a seller. They would go, okay, if a bunch of lenders did it, then it would become really even more important. And I guess lastly, agreements for sale are very well known in commercial property, both for apartment buildings and for other commercial properties like strip malls, or on farm or agricultural sales. Those are often more difficult to get financing for, and sellers often have to step up and be the bank in commercial or agricultural sales. And so there's another opportunity for sellers to be the bank and use seller financing, and for you as buyers to purchase without having to go to a bank yourself. So James said to me, Barry, we don't want to hear about circumstances other than distressed. And there you go. That's 3 slides worth of circumstances where if you listen hard to what a seller is saying, if you understand the agreement for sale strategy, and if you listen hard, you will hear about those opportunities, and then you have a chance to do an agreement for sale. Whew. All right. Well, what about some case studies? Let's do that. First, I have to just, I'm so thirsty. This doing this makes me very thirsty. Okay, so let's do some case studies where we're not in the distressed seller side of things. We are on or in the motivated seller side of things. Case study number one. So my client bought the property for $240,000, put a mortgage on, did a renovation, did a second suite, a legal secondary suite. And when he was done with that legal secondary suite, the after repaired value, the ARV, I love that, ARV. It's like I'm a pirate. So the ARV, based on a realtor's market analysis, certified market analysis, comparative market analysis, was $440,000. The bank, who was looking to do takeout financing, disagreed. They said, well, you know, our bank appraiser says it's only worth $410,000. And by the way, that's something you run into a lot, is that your realtor can do his market analysis, but different banks have different lending and appraisal requirements. And so there can be quite a difference between what the comparables say and what the bank says they will actually lend. So in this case, the ARB was 440, but the bank appraisal said 410, got an 80% mortgage at 2.9%. So that $331,000 was enough to pay off the renovation costs, which is great. And now our seller wants to sell, but like lots of sellers, he's going, damn bank, they said it's only worth 410. My realtor told me it's worth 440. He starts to advertise and finds an AFS buyer who's ready to pay $448,000. $448,000. So this is a buyer who can't qualify for a new mortgage, but who loves this property. And in this particular circumstance, this buyer put up cash of 38 grand. And that leaves the seller, being the bank, for $410,000. So the buyer can't get a mortgage. The seller is selling by way of agreement for sale. The seller gets 38,000 cash. The seller is the bank for $410,000, and they charge the buyer 3.7%. Now you remember the seller has an underlying mortgage of $331,000 on which he's paying 2.9%. So what does case study number one tell us? Over the 2 years of this agreement for sale, because agreements for sale like mortgages have a term, our seller is going to make $116,000. He's going to get $38,000 now. He's going to get $78,000 profit over the 2 years. And this property is going to throw off $500 a month positive cash flow. So how does this look from the buyer perspective and the seller perspective? And where does all this fit in the motivated seller category? So in this, for case study number one, we can see that the seller gets his price, and he also earns money on the interest rate spread. Remember, his mortgage is at 2.9 on 331,000, but he's getting 3.7% on 410,000. So he's not only got his price, and it's a really decent price over the ARV of 440, plus he's doing nicely on the interest rate spread. And those were a couple of the things that we talked about in what motivates sellers. What about the buyer? I mean, we're not really here to talk about buyers, but it's got to be win-win. All these deals have to be win-win. In this particular case, the buyer gets financing. Remember, he couldn't qualify for a mortgage, so he can't buy anymore unless he's going to get seller financing. And his property, even with those terms as expressed, is still a positive cash flow property for him. So that's our first case study. I think it's a really good one. And let's move on to case study number two. Oh, I like this one. Case study number two. Haven't run into this one before, but my seller said that he was yeah, kind of nearing retirement, been looking around about what he was going to do in retirement, and found his own particular tropical paradise that was pretty friendly to folks immigrating and providing some investment, popular as a tourist place. And it looked like our seller could build a few units down there for not very much money, and maybe live in one and rent out a couple and have the perfect retirement for him. So that was his plan. But as in many, I guess you could say it's a third world country, so certainly second world. Anyway, not a really sophisticated financial system, and not a really big middle class. So in countries and places like that, financing is very, very tough to get, very tough to get. And in fact, in this particular tropical paradise, it's not a paradise for somebody who wants to borrow money and build a property and get a mortgage, because mortgages are not available. You can't even get a mortgage. You could put up 50% and not get a mortgage. So our seller has some revenue properties here in Alberta, and he needs to get some of that equity out of his Alberta properties, in order to pump that equity into building the dream home in the tropical paradise. So that's the background. Unluckily, in Alberta, the market has dropped. The particular property that is the example here, the value had dropped, so there's less equity if the seller sells traditionally, but it still was going to be a good positive cash flow property. But for this seller, again, he needs his price in order to get enough money to do the dream home. And he starts advertising and finds a buyer who loves the property. And guess what? The buyer can't qualify. And in this case, the seller doesn't actually want him to qualify, because he wants a buyer where the seller can be a bank. Now, this buyer, luckily enough, even though he can't qualify, he's got a big deposit to put down. It's going to be positive cash flow property, so he loves that. And the result of this whole thing is the seller is able to extract enough equity, because he can get his price, to build exactly one more unit down in his tropical paradise. So in the end, what happens here? This is a little bit the same as the last one, in that the seller gets his price. And that's a big factor. I'm finding that in the non-distressed agreements for sale, if the seller can get his price, they're prepared to make concessions. And what this did for the seller, by selling for AFS, he was able to maximize the equity that he had in the Alberta property, because number one, he was getting his price, and number two, he didn't have to pay any commission or any payout penalties. So there's another seller factor that we're working into this scenario. And as well, he got to offload management. He was managing this revenue property before, and now he's spending a lot more time on his building project in the tropics, so he was able to offload that. All right, and we have one more case study in tonight's presentation. And here's the circumstance for this seller. So the seller, I love this one. This is an amazingly creative deal. So in this case, we had a seller who listed his property, and the market dropped. He wasn't forced to sell. You know, the flat to negative Alberta market had depressed what the seller could get for this property. And again, here it shows up again. The seller wants his asking price. And so he worked with the realtor, and he tried to get his price, and he couldn't. Finally, the listing expired, and he's still left with his property. He advertised, I think, on Kijiji, and was contacted by an AFS buyer who understands how AFS works. This particular buyer wanted to buy the home, do a really nice renovation, and then sell it into the marketplace, commonly known as the fix and flip strategy. Very classic strategy that if you say fix and flip, everybody understands what you're talking about. So that's what the buyer wanted to do. But he needed to buy the property, number one, and then he needed money to do his renovation. So that's the buyer's issue. So he's the buyer who understands how agreements for sale work, talked to the seller and said, here's who I am. This is what I do as a business. I'm really good at it. Here's pictures of some properties that I've worked on before. Here's what I bought them for. Here's what I sold them for. I know what I'm doing. And so I would like you to sell me the house, and I want you to be my bank, and we're going to do this by this thing called agreement for sale. So he explains it to the seller, and the seller agrees that he will sell the property by way of agreement for sale. And so what does this mean for the buyer? The buyer can avoid a hard money lender. If he has to buy and he can't qualify for mortgage traditionally, he has to go off to a hard money lender who are available, and there are hard money lenders who would have lent to him promptly because he's got a good track record, but he's got to pay 12 to 14% interest and a whole bunch of fees to set it up, which makes it very expensive for this buyer. So if the seller will agree to an agreement for sale, which he did, that is the solution to both the seller and the buyer's situation. So what happens here? The seller gets his asking price, which he just somehow had in his head. He absolutely had to have that. The buyer gets cheap financing. He agreed with the seller that he would make a payment that is the payment on the seller's underlying mortgage, which I think was maybe half the price of the home. So the seller had paid down his mortgage. So it was really a small monthly payment that the buyer has to make. So now he's purchased the property and has to make only a small monthly payment. That is absolutely outstanding. Saves a whole bunch of money on legal fees. Just works. Now, what about, this is the part I really love about this one. What about the renovation money? Our buyer needs, $70,000 or $80,000 to do the renovation. Well, as it turns out, the difference between the sale price and the seller's underlying mortgage leaves a big chunk of equity in the property for the seller. So our buyer says, I can borrow that money. I've got someone who will lend me the money, lend me the 70 or 80 grand that I need to do the rental. But of course, they need security. They need security for the loan. How about if we register that loan against your property, Mr. Seller, and then when I finish the renovation and I sell it, there'll be enough money to pay off what I owe you under the agreement for sale, plus the loan that my lender is going to lend me so I can renovate the property. And what did the seller say? Sounds like a good idea to me. So that's what happened. And I've never seen that before. So folks, this is what can happen when you listen to what a seller's issue is and where you understand these strategies and where you build trust. I know Wayne Hillier, who I do a lot of work with, Wayne is very big on building trust, says it's the single biggest factor in having sellers listen to him when he's coming up with a creative deal. So I just want everybody to understand, as James and the Mogul crew understand, that the agreement for sale strategy is way bigger than just dealing with distressed sellers. Distressed sellers is the most obvious one. There's lots to do. It's got its own category. It's great, but it is the agreement for sale strategy is way, way bigger. And I just want to emphasize again that the way you can really get these deals done and the way you can have a seller listen to what you're saying is when you're looking to help. You're looking to help and not looking to maximize the dollars in your pocket at the expense of the seller. That will shine through in what you say, and the seller will listen more carefully to you. They'll listen with a more positive ear. They'll understand that you're playing for win-win, and that you're just not trying to do as well for yourself as you can. There's no categorizing why sellers do what they do, but It's big, big, big if you listen and be a problem solver instead of being a dollar maximizer. So, and I'm just going to finish with what is an underlying truism for what I teach in my Agreement for Sale courses and in all the creative focus workshops that I do, and that Donna and I are just absolutely determined that people listen to. And that is that if you understand a particular strategy, you will recognize the opportunity. If you understand the strategy, you will recognize the opportunity. And AFS is just one creative strategy. We've spent 25 minutes talking about it tonight. We do a course that's a full day. So if you're saying to yourself, there's a few details missing here, Barry, it's because it's a full day course, folks. And if you want more information on that, you can go to barrymcguire.ca. That's barrymcguire.ca. You can poke around there. You can email Donna at rcpsuccess.ca, and she'll tell you all about that stuff. Yeah, so Devin, I think that wraps up my presentation on the motivated seller agreement for sale strategy.
Well, thank you very much, Barry. That, again, is just some absolutely fantastic information. I've certainly taken Barry's course more than once, and there's nobody better to train somebody either new or experienced on agreements for sale. And once again, you brought some wonderful new information to those that are interested in creative strategies. So thank you very much.
You are welcome. Always glad to do it.
Perfect. And one last thing, with Halloween around the corner, I guess we know what you're dressing up with or dressing up for on Saturday. I guess it's a pirate, because I'll
be saying that to the kids. I'll be saying that to the 3 kids who show up at my door on Halloween.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Well, it'll definitely be a very different Halloween this year. But again, thank you so much. And I know that there's a few people that I've been chatting about agreement for sales with that are watching tonight. I asked them specifically to join in. So I'm sure we'll have some great educated conversations tomorrow. So thank you again.
Great. Thanks again, everyone.
Wonderful. Okay. And so thank you also to everybody that participated tonight. James Canal, the owner of Mogul, also Danielle Bourgeois from Field Law, who is working with Barry, and she provided some great information on foreclosures. Keaton Kirkwood and Robinson Smith on the Smith maneuver. If you want to watch any of these videos, we will put them on our YouTube site. It takes us just a couple of days for Jen to get everything up and running. So we really appreciate everybody's patience on that. And there's some great information, not just on this current one, but on all of them over the course of the past few years. And you'll certainly see Barry on there several times, because he's such a wealth of great information. We run Mogul Masterminds the last Wednesday of every month. So the next one is coming up on Wednesday, November 25th. And during these uncertain times, this topic couldn't come along any better. We are going to be talking to people that have some inspiring stories about achieving financial freedom at an early age. They've used real estate to basically get out of the rat race. They've retired using real estate. And one of the keynote speakers is going to be a good friend of Mogul, Tim Sy from Trust Your Talent, who has an amazing story of basically being broke at one time and using real estate to achieve financial freedom. So again, that's Wednesday, November 25th. So be sure to tune in for that. That is everything for us. So we appreciate everybody dialing in. Again, a record attendance here at the October Mogul Mastermind. Please be safe. Make sure that you wear a mask as much as you can. Let's be safe and healthy and get through this current crisis. And we'll see what happens next Tuesday, Wednesday during the American election. Certainly things will be looking a little different next week. And have a happy Halloween. All the best, everybody. Thank you.